Okay, welcome back. This is our third video for week 5 of Social 101 at Ohlone College. And we were right in the middle of talking about social class. So just as a reminder, social class are groups of people who share a similar economic position in society based on wealth and income and prestige. Also, similar types of occupations and similar levels of education. So the components of social class, or how it's determined where you will land in the system of social class, is dependent on your income and wealth, occupational prestige, your level of education, and your relative levels of power. We already talked about the upper class and the middle class. I'd like to just jump in and talk about the working class. People who are in the working class generally have occupations or jobs which require little education and basically working with your hands. Sometimes these jobs have prestige, but more often than not, they do not. Sometimes working class people make around the same amount of money as middle class people. However, the difference still is in that the occupation requires working with your hands and doing manual labor. So, building contractors, for instance, may be considered even in the working class because what they do often is manual labor, and although they require a lot of licensure, they don't necessarily require college degrees. So carpenters, people who, waste management people, underpaid domestic work, these all fall within the working class. And then the lower class is the poor or the underclass. This class is characterized by joblessness, poverty, the unemployed, people who are, require food stamps in order to eat. Maybe they live in the streets. Often the poor, aged, elderly people who have little savings. That people from the lower class live in poorly maintained and run-down housing. They often lack medical insurance and proper medical care. Sometimes they are unskilled, but other times they have been victims of downsizing, where companies move to other countries. This class is characterized by poverty, but sometimes portrayed as being criminals, drug abusers, or even lazy. So and I wanted to mention that social class is also characterized to some degree by lifestyle. So people who are in different social classes are people who share similar lifestyles. These include different patterns of speech, different tastes in music, fashion, and food, different ways of decorating their homes, and different forms of leisure activity. So you can often find differentiation between people in the various social classes based on their lifestyle. So I'm going to show you this. You can come back and look at it. I'm not going to take time to talk about it, but this will show you how the American class structure is broken down according to the various classes. So as I mentioned, in the United States, we do live within a fairly open social class system. It's not completely open. There are impediments to movement up or down within the class structure, but it is much more open than the other ones that I've shown you today. So social mobility is movement within the class system, either up or down. There are several types of social mobility. There's intergenerational mobility, which is mobility from one generation to the other, and intragenerational mobility, when one person moves social class within his or her lifetime. Usually when we talk about social mobility, we are talking about intergenerational mobility, or our ability, or the fact of moving into a different social class than our parents. Now, this is generally considered vertical mobility. I put this horizontal or lateral mobility on my slide, but I don't even believe in it. Really, what we're talking about when we're talking about social mobility is vertical mobility, and that is moving up or down in social class. So let's talk about mobility trends. So upward mobility becomes more common as societies industrialize. And that is because education becomes more accessible and movement is possible. There are more opportunities available in the shift from an agrarian society. Now, I want to talk about current times and about trends in social mobility. Like, is it possible? Can we move out of the social class that we are born into? So, first of all, mobility is common. 1/3 to 1/2 of people achieve an occupational status one level higher than their parents. But this also means that 1/2 do not move social class. Those who do move up in social class do not usually move far. So we can look at the direction of mobility. So according to studies, most mobility is upwards, which is good news, right? So most of the time, if people are moving social class, they are moving up in social class. That is because that is due to higher levels of education by subsequent generation. Changes in occupational structure also contribute. So unskilled jobs in the United States have declined and have moved overseas. Skilled jobs have been created due to technology, and there are more high-status jobs in each succeeding generation. However, we are currently experiencing a time of increasing downward mobility for the middle class, especially. For generations born after 1970, there is less economic growth and upward mobility has declined. So I just answered your, I just answered 2 of your quiz questions. Okay, let's go back. So the one I just answered is quiz question 5. The most common form of social mobility is upwards social mobility. So that's your answer for 5. And then 4 is the size of social classes. Which 2 social classes are roughly the same in size? That is the middle and working class. They are around the same sizes. Okay, so where am I? Range of mobility. How far do people move up or down? You know, is it common that people move from like the working class all the way into the upper class? I'm here to tell you that unfortunately, no, that is not common. So the distance people move in social class is usually small, short steps. Broad leaps are not common. The lowest levels of mobility are from the upper and lower classes. So it's much less common for people to move out of the upper class to move into a different social class. And it's less common for people from the lower class also to move into a different social class. The highest levels of mobility are found within the working and middle class. This is even more the case in the last 20 years. Okay, where am I? So, what are the determinants of social mobility? What's going to cause us to move up or down in social class? For some reason, my notes aren't good on this. So there are two major types, structural mobility and individual factors. So structural mobility, as a determinant of social mobility, it are factors which impact an individual's social mobility, which are found outside of the individual in society. So these are things you have no control over and are outside of you within society. For instance, changes in technology. So the internet, for instance, had a huge impact on many sectors of the job market, such as journalism. If you worked in journalism before, you might find it difficult to work in journalism now, especially print journalism, because of technological advances in that field and because everything is found online. So this is a case of structural mobility. You might find yourself moving down in social class because you can't find a job, but this would be just a factor of society and not according to your own individual effort or anything about you in particular. The other determinants of social mobility are individual factors, the most important being accident of birth or your family background. So who your parents are, who your family is going to determine in large part whether you are in a position to get more education, to move up or down in social class, whether or not you have more social networks and connections that might help you get into a good college or get into a good job position. The other most important individual factor is education. Education is highly correlated with social mobility. So the more education that you have, the more likely that you are to be able to move up in social class. It's one of the main factors. Now, ethnicity, race, gender, and membership in other marginalized groups might mean that it's more difficult for you to have social mobility, depending on which group you are a member of. And then lastly is luck. Luck, obviously being in the right place at the right time, striking it rich on the lottery, writing a hit song, I don't know, all these things. These are luck and might change your social class. That would be wonderful if it did. So how do we compare in the United States to other countries around the world in terms of social mobility? What you see in this chart here is how the United States compares to other industrialized nations in terms of moving up in social class. You can see we're here in the red. So besides the United Kingdom, we have the lowest levels of social mobility than all the other nations. And in fact, these Nordic countries, these Scandinavian countries, like Denmark, has 3 times higher social mobility than we have here in the United States. And this may be due to their educational systems, because all of these countries have free college education, free or very free, except for Canada. But the 3 at the top have free or almost free college education. Okay, so I've answered all your quiz questions. That's it for now, and I look forward to seeing you on the discussion boards and elsewhere this week.